In case it hasn't been made very clear on this channel, I love the Serious Sam games. I've been playing these games for about 5 years now, and while that might not seem like a very lengthy amount of experience, I find these particularly special for being my introduction to the world of first-person shooters. So in light of Serious Sam celebrating his 15th anniversary, I felt that this would be a good opportunity to reflect on his history of games while Serious Sam 4 continues its current development. I guess you could maybe call this a retrospective, as I feel it's important to stress I've never really made a proper review of any video game before, and given my biased appreciation for this frenetic shooter series, it would be very difficult to find any glaring faults that other voices could easily point out. That being said, I'll do my best to analyze how the games play from the most objective point of view I can find, and I'll try to find grounds for recommendation to anyone who might be unfamiliar with the franchise. We'll begin by taking a look at Serious Sam Classic. Now technically, I'm covering two games in one video as they were released roughly a year apart from each other. However, they were developed on the same engine, and today they're considered a single game. Let's start off with a little bit of backstory on Crow Team. Crow Team was founded back in 1993, originally consisting of only 6 people. They developed games for the Amiga and DOSBox alike, the most notable one being Football Glory, which will hopefully be getting an HD remake at some point, just want to get that out there. There were a few other games that they had worked on, but even Wikipedia doesn't have that much information on these elusive titles. The most informative source on one such game called Inordinate Desire turned out to be a top-down, turn-based strategy game. Beginning its development around 1996, Crow Team's staff had expanded to about 10 or 12 members as they worked on a new game. This was then titled In the Flesh, a first-person shooter which presumably took place in Gothic dungeons. Although later, of course, this idea was scrapped, and Crow Team changed it to Serious Sam, a frantic first-person shooter with large open environments and dozens upon dozens of monsters attacking you on screen. Fast forward to 2001, on March 23rd of that year, the first game in the series entitled The First Encounter was released.
Sam I am.
So, how about a little synopsis of what's happening in this universe of recycled 90s action heroes? At the dawn of the 21st century, mankind makes a startling discovery. Traces of an ancient, but technologically advanced civilization of the Syrians are uncovered in the ancient ruins of the Egyptian Empire. The implications of these findings lead humanity to the far reaches of space, the final frontier, leading voyages to uncover new worlds, galaxies, and solar systems. Everything seemed perfect, but too perfect to last. In wake of discovering an entity known by humanity as mental, the unstable warlord begins wreaking havoc, seeking dominance of our very own universe, leaving Earth as the final stronghold to be crushed by its tyranny. In a last-ditch effort, world leaders turn to a device left by the Syrians called the Time Lock, a device capable of sending a single person back in time. The choice of whom to send is obvious. Unfortunately, Duke Nukem was stuck in development hell with his latest game at the time, so world leaders had to send in his second cousin. Meet Sam Stone, a captain in the United States military. Easy to distinguish him by his casual attire and red sneakers. Yeah, I know, Sam in this box art bears quite a striking resemblance to the Duke, but he'll develop a more unique appearance later on. Also, why is there a xenomorph on the cover? Serious Sam arrives in ancient Egypt with the mission of assassinating Mental in the past to prevent the destruction of humanity in the future. Sam's first task is to escape Earth and book a flight to planet Sirius, which currently stands as the home of Mental long after the elimination of the Syrian inhabitants. Sam's adventure begins by collecting 4 elements guarded in various shrines across Egypt, and penetrating the heart of Memphis to capture the Amun-Ra item. Having all 5 trinkets in hand gives him access to Thebes, which consists of 2 cities, Karnak and Luxor. In Luxor, Sam discovers a beacon concealed inside an obelisk, which is actually used to probe a spaceship that the Syrians have left hidden somewhere in our galaxy. The final stretch of the journey is located at the Great Pyramid, where Sam faces a colossal warlock known as Ugzan III. Since the spaceship only accepts a weight limit of 2 tons or less, Sam lures Ugzan into the beam, which electrocutes the giant space cockroach to death. Upon entering this beam, Sam is teleported to the spaceship, makes a quick phone call to Mental informing him that his days are numbered, and the game ends. It's not exactly a deep story, but there are bits and pieces of lore which you can read into on your adventure. The main point is that you're a bulky action hero who must blast his way through ancient Egypt, and if that's as intricate a setup you're willing to put up with, then this game might be in your best interests. The aim of the game is running and gunning. You move Sam around using your typical shooter control system. Naturally, you'll play the game in first-person perspective, although there is the option to switch to third-person if you're interested. Your HUD displays your score around the top left and center of the screen. At the bottom left displays your health and armor meter. The lower center will show you the weapon you have equipped along with how much ammo is available for said weapon, and the lower right of the screen shows a collective amount of ammo you have in store for all of your weapons. If you're yearning for any information, tips, or strategies, you can invoke Natrixa, indicated by a blinking email symbol at the top right. Natrixa is Sam's built-in computer system who will update you with mission briefings on the levels you're in, tips and navigational support, information on any weapons you've collected, enemies which you've killed, and even has a statistics tab which displays your score, game time, enemy count, and secret count. Secrets are abundant in this game, fitting in with the classic shooter tradition. These can range from secret weapons stashed away in walls, health and armor pickups, ammunition, even enemies. Getting to know the location of some of these secrets can make the journey ahead much easier, especially when it comes to weaponry. There are 13 main levels and 2 secret levels throughout the game. The sizes of these levels are large in scale, but if you're taking a rather basic path, it'll usually take you around 10 to 15 minutes per earlier stages, while later on that time can be extended from around 20 to 30 minutes. The battle system consists of enemies either spawning in at a close proximity, or just appearing in designated locations, but more of the former. You have to keep on your toes. This game will throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at your face, and it's not all forgiving. Hell, even picking up certain power-ups will cause an enemy to suddenly appear out of nowhere and punch you in the face, and this becomes especially apparent at higher difficulties. This game has a penchant for schmuck bait, usually in the form of small health or armor pickups, so do be careful. The difficulty scale in this game consists of 5 base difficulties to choose from, and a 6th unlockable mode. On Tourist difficulty, your base health starts at 200 and can be capped at 300 alongside your armor. Anytime your health drops below 200, it will regenerate. You can carry twice as much ammo for all of your weapons as well. Enemies will move and attack slowly, and output the least amount of damage. Self-inflicted damage with explosive weapons is tossed completely out the window here, so defying all common sense, feel free to unload a barrage of rockets into an enemy standing 2 feet in front of you. Easy mode shares many attributes with Tourist, except that the monsters will inflict a bit more damage than before. There's no health regeneration, however, so watch out. Normal is probably a good starting point if you're versatile with shooters. Your base health is at 100, but can be effectively doubled with the right power-ups. The same applies for armor. It's worth pointing out that you can only carry half as much ammunition compared to Tourist in Easy, however, and for this difficulty and beyond, you can damage yourself with explosive weapons. Hard is hard, where the enemy spawns can get a little bit nasty. That's about it. Serious difficulty is where the game will physically kick you out of your seat and proceed to beat you to death with a rusty crowbar. This difficulty is hardcore. Enemies attack the quickest and inflict the most amount of damage. And you know how picking up that health or locating that secret may have been harmless in lower difficulties? Expect there to be an enemy attached to it now. This difficulty will test you, and it's strongly advised that you know where to locate secret weapons in earlier levels to give you a bit of an easier time. The upside to your brutal execution? You can carry twice as much ammo! Lastly, there is mental difficulty, which can be unlocked if you've beaten the game in serious mode. Statistically, it's identical to hard mode, but the enemies will phase in and out of visibility every couple of seconds. I wouldn't exactly recommend playing on mental unless you're bored and looking for a decent challenge. It just helps to know your enemy behavior before taking them on under a stipulation like this. And on the subject of enemies, let's take a look and see what kind of sideshow mooks this game has in store for us. Every enemy in this game has a distinct appearance and indicative sound. Only variants of a certain enemy will occasionally sound identical. The most basic foot soldiers in this game are the Beheaded. You have Rocketeers sporting purple shirts who shoot weak projectiles. Firecrackers wear red attire and shoot 5 weak projectiles that travel on the ground. The green shirts are Bombers, who toss bombs from a distance and explode upon death. And then there's headless, screaming kamikazes. These guys are probably the most iconic enemies of the series, appearing in every game to date, even in spin-offs. Next we have Nars, these bipedal bags of sewage who vary in size and abilities. Most Nars will run up to your face and punch you. Some Nars will retract their limbs and fly in the air, and then there are Nars which just appear partially invisible. One of the most infamous enemy types are the Clear Skeletons. These assholes are the melee enemies from hell. They throw pairs of bolasses at you from a distance and will pounce towards you at close range. Their speed, attacks, and numbers will only get worse on higher difficulties. A second type of suicidal enemy exists in the form of the Marshhopper. They have next to no health, but they will commonly attack in swarms. Scythian harpies dominate the skies of open battlefields and will cast a spell semi-frequently. There is a possibility that you can knock them out of the air and force them to travel on foot, but they run at roughly the same speed as you. In watery areas, be mindful of electrofish. They discharge electricity at close range, which to my knowledge is completely random as to whether or not the game decides you should take damage from it. Naturally, as you progress further throughout the game, you'll start to encounter some of the more larger enemies at quite an alarming frequency. First, there are wearables, which behave roughly the same as an actual bull. Like the electrofish, the chances of you taking damage is based purely on voodoo magic, so being bucked into the air may or may not be hazardous to your health. The most annoying enemies of this game award has to be given to arachnoids, chain gun wielding scorpions that open fire on you at just about any range. They're the only hit scan enemies of the game, however, and thankfully, their accuracy will drop the further you stand away. The second most annoying enemies in my book, however, will be the reptiloids. They're the snipers of Mental's horde and will promptly vomit homing fireballs in your direction. The green ones are common and cast one fireball at a time, while the orange Highlander variant will spit out a volley of them. You have giant brains affixed to mechanical legs known as biomechs. The blue ones will fire a stream of lasers, and the red guys will shoot missiles. Late into the campaign, the game introduces the lava golems, varying in size and attacks. Larger golems will cast fireballs using the prediction method based on the direction you're moving, while smaller golems will act like any other enemy that shoots a basic projectile. Yes indeed, Mental's horde is a proverbial stain on your otherwise perfectly clean dress shirt, and that stain has got to go. Sam can carry up to 10 different weapons in his first adventure, and each one possesses a strength against certain enemies, which will give you plenty of choices on how to fight your battles. You'll start the game off with 2 weapons in your inventory, a knife and a revolver, which will be quickly upgraded to dual revolvers. The knife very well might be one of the most powerful weapons in the entire game. The swing rate is very quick, and its hitbox is incredibly broken. You'll be dancing with clears and taming harpies in no time at all with adequate footwork. The revolvers are Sam's trademark sidearms, containing infinite ammo and perfect accuracy. I guess it's worth pointing out, too, that they're the only weapons in the game which you have to actively reload. Shotguns consist of your usual batch. You've got your 12 gauge and your double barrel. I think it goes without saying, but shotguns in this game naturally obey the laws of video game logic, where the pellets practically become popcorn kernels at long range. Otherwise, both of these bad boys pack a pretty decent punch at close to medium range. Your machine gun in this game is the Tommy gun. It's a decent weapon that has a decent rate of fire. Overall, it's pretty decent. Later on, you'll upgrade to the minigun, one of the more iconic weapons of the series. It fires incredibly fast, at the cost of sharing the same ammo pool as the Tommy gun, but it chews up your bullet supply faster than the average Canadian devours a box of Timbits. Next in your arsenal are explosives. The rocket launcher shoots missiles that travel in a straight direction. It can also be used for rocket jumping, if you're a fan of sequence breaking. The grenade launcher is a charge-based weapon. Depending on how long you hold the firing key determines how far the grenade will travel, which in some cases can make it superior to the trajectory of rockets. Grenades can bounce off surfaces but will always explode upon contact with an enemy. Plus, they're easy to spam in a panicky situation. The laser gun is kind of similar to the machine guns, only the beams travel in a straight direction in a quad barrel shape. It's a good medium between the Thompson and the minigun, since the lasers will deal a bit more damage than bullets. Although there is one unfortunate bug with both the laser gun and the Thompson, which causes them to shoot at a slower firing rate for a period of time. I believe this is a bug in the engine which dictates that the player must spend X amount of time in the current game until both weapons will shoot at their intended firing rates. Just figured I'd point that out. Finally, we have this game's BFG 9000, the SBC cannon.
Look at the size of that thing!
Like the grenade launcher, this is a charge-based weapon. The longer you charge, the greater the distance and power of the resulting cannonball will be. This weapon is godlike. It kills nearly everything in a single charged shot, and the cannonballs can pierce through multiple targets like hordes of oncoming werebulls. As you can see, Serious Sam revolves around a lot of fighting. Sometimes you'll be diverging from the main road to push some buttons, pull some levers, acquire some artifacts, but it largely revolves around killing anything that does so much as blink. It can be as simple as killing off a couple of patrols here and there, but at other times, you're laying waste to literal armies in arena battles. Arena fights are prominently common and notably intense, being set either in small enclosed rooms or open deserts and temples. Enemy prioritization is a major factor in all of this. In the middle of a fight, you'll have to make decisions on who dies first and which weapon seems most appropriate to use against your other targets. You may develop a habit of constantly swapping back and forth between weapons as you're backpedaling or strafing. This habit you'll develop is known as dancing with enemies, and it's crucial to understand your enemy attack patterns before you face them when they're all combined together in a single army. Aside from that, be very mindful of the sounds that they make. I advise caution on higher difficulties too, where monsters lying in wait around pillars or corridors can become a bit of a common trend, especially in Luxor. Seriously, who designed this level? There's clear skeletons around almost every corner, every pillar, on top of every ledge, and to top it all off, some of these enemy spawn points are just downright dickish. Well, rant aside, let's move on and talk a little bit about how the game looks. The presentation of this game is excellent. Serious Sam runs on Croteam's own Serious engine. Prior to the game's development, there really wasn't an existing engine that could house components such as large environments with smooth rendering or the capacity for tons of enemies. So, the Serious engine was developed for that purpose, and Croteam still continues to work with their own technology today. Large objects will be rendered at tremendous distances with no slowdown. On average, this game can be running at about 120 frames per second. The artificial intelligence of the numerous foes you encounter is rather simplistic, but then again, the lack of complex AI allows the engine to handle this crazy amount of looks with no setbacks in performance. For the time of its release, the sheer scale of enemies on screen was what gave Serious Sam a good reputation. Aside from the engine's various capabilities and visual effects, this art style still looks very nice to me. The land of Egypt is bright and vibrant, but simultaneously easy on the eyes, kind of a fantasy realistic art style with watercolor paintings of Egyptians and hieroglyphs. The soundtrack of this game is composed by Damian Ravunitz, who decided to use a percussion-based soundtrack for the game. Every song in this game is based on rhythm, and while many of the tracks are noticeably repetitive, they match the setting of the level quite well. When there isn't an enemy to be seen, a peaceful tune will play, but as soon as at least one of Mental's minions attacks, the tempo kicks up. There aren't too many music tracks that stick in my head, but I'll make the exception for the peaceful melody of Hatshepsut, and both of the tracks in Dunes. Can we talk about the Dune soundtrack? Let's talk about the Dune soundtrack. The Dune soundtrack is just majestic. Serious Sam: The First Encounter was an award-winning success. Fast-paced, relentlessly difficult, it presented a challenge to any aficionado of first-person shooters, while serving as a reminder of the days where shooters were about manly men, explosions, and cheesy one-liners. This is probably my favorite Serious Sam game of all time, actually. But Croteam wasn't finished yet. Building off of the success with The First Encounter, an expansion to the campaign was demanded. Merely less than a year later, on February 2nd of 2002, Croteam released Part 2 of Serious Sam Classic, entitled The Second Encounter.
Sam I am.
The Second Encounter is the game which initiated my interest in Serious Sam. I had seen a physical copy of the game lying around my house for a long time, since my dad did play a couple of classic shooters back in the day. He introduced me to this game when I was around 12 or 13, and I soon decided to purchase a physical copy of The First Encounter on eBay, just to complete the collection. The PC market is so far into the digital age now that owning these CDs is kind of pointless. Still, I'm proud to own them. After a brief recap of the events in The First Encounter a la storybook mode, the Second Encounter picks up right where the story had originally left off. While Sam is piloting the starship away from Earth, the developers of the game accidentally crash into the vessel on their crate bus, and Sam crash lands in South America. Luckily, the Syrians had visited a number of locations in different time periods apart from Egypt, and had left a backup ship somewhere in Europe. Even more fortunately, there are a convenient set of portals which lead to the starship, starting off nearby Sam's location. Upon evacuating the ship, Sam's goal is to escape Earth yet again. Starting off in the Mayan Age of South America, storming the wealthy cities of Mesopotamia, and arriving at his final destination in medieval Europe. As to be expected, Mental is still very much aware of Sam's presence on Earth, and not only is he enlisting his army of mutants to withhold Sam from making any progress, he's tasked Guardians in each time era to further prevent Sam from reaching the spaceship. Sam faces off against a wind god, a cybernetic mosquito, and a crazed sorcerer before claiming his prize in the Grand Cathedral, the Holy Grail. I guess he's taking it because it belongs in a museum? After a quick chat with Mental in a confessional booth, Sam boards the backup ship and sets his sight on planet Sirius once again, leaving Earth for good. Gameplay remains identical to the first encounter. All of the requirements are met: running, dodging, shooting, strafing. There are plenty more open fields and pastures for you to roam around in, and many of the battles are bigger compared to the previous game. Likewise, the number of arena fights have been expanded, some of them containing gimmicks to keep the experience a little more fresh. The second encounter consists of 12 different levels. No secret levels this time around. These stages are considerably lengthier than before. A majority of them will probably take you about 30 to 60 minutes on average. There are 5 in the Mayan Age, 4 in the Persian Age, and 3 in the Medieval Age. Every time you enter a new era, you'll be stripped of all of your weaponry, which adds a new level of challenge to earlier stages, when you have a limited selection to work with. With new levels come new secrets, and man, they went all out with some of these. This game is simply packed with hidden treasures for you to find, some taking on a more humorous approach than previously encountered. Tricks and traps are thrown into the mix from time to time. You might have to exercise patience to avoid being flattened by crush-o-matics in one area, or you'll be trapped in a room that has a trampoline-like floor with enemies pouring inside. There's even one section where the floor is constantly collapsing, and that leads you into hidden chambers with lava golems and scorpions. One of the additions in gameplay are a few anti-gravity sections. Their appearances are few and far between, and there were actually a couple of them located in secret areas from the first encounter, but there are a couple of instances in this game which are mandatory to pass through, which change up the flow of battle. I'm pretty neutral with this gimmick, mostly because it's not utilized very often, but I will admit I would have enjoyed seeing Croteam explore this idea a little bit further. Serious Sam Classic is the only game in the franchise that utilizes the changes in gravity, and I might clarify why that is later on in the video. The second encounter is sporting 8 new enemies for you to tango with. Newer foot soldiers consist of Zorgs. Mercenaries are skinless orange creatures wielding plasma guns. They fire up to 2 shots in your direction. The few lucky Zorgs that managed to avoid losing their skin were promoted to commanders, tougher variants which shoot a 5-spread plasma shot. Think of these guys as elite rocketeers and firecrackers. In a bizarre science experiment, Mental created a muscular monstrosity with a pumpkin for a head and a chainsaw as a weapon of choice. These enemies behave similarly to werebills, so dodging them is easy enough. Although I swear they carried the loudest chainsaws ever manufactured, as you can practically hear them revving up from across the entire damn map. Reptiloid demons are bulky beasts from hell that cast speedy, indestructible fireballs. Similar to green reptiloids, demons tend to be perched on faraway towers or temples, acting as snipers. Zumbuuls are the most unique enemies in their appearance, carrying a semi-powerful rocket launcher in each hand. They fire both shots at once, although one shot always travels in a direction that isn't where you're standing. Turret guns make an appearance in the shape of 2 types of cannons, static and rotating. You'd better keep your eyes peeled for these cannons, they can practically one-shot you if you're careless. Static cannons are incapable of shooting in more than one direction, while rotating cannons can aim within a set line of sight. Lastly, there's the incredibly rare variant of the Reptiloid called the Highlander's Bride. She's essentially a souped-up version of the Highlander, greater health and higher frequency of attacks. Thankfully, the second encounter is generous enough to give Sam a couple of new toys to play with. Starting off your adventure, Serious Sam taps into its inner doom, giving you a chainsaw.
Look, Ma, I'm a lumberjack.
Like the knife, the chainsaw has an utterly broken hitbox and with proper circle strafing, can mop the floor with melee enemies. Marsh hoppers present almost no threat whatsoever when you have the chainsaw equipped. So much so that unlike the first encounter, there are very few rooms swarming with the suicidal frogs. How peculiar. If you still appreciate close-range combat, you can roast your enemies with a flamethrower, which is actually the only weapon that survived being scrapped in Serious Sam's alpha development. Spraying your enemy will usually cause it to drop dead in a matter of seconds, although you can set them on fire and cause them to take afterburn damage for a short period of time, which can sometimes produce a rather delightful sound. Thankfully for any long-range enthusiast, this game throws a sniper rifle into your arms. Now before I say anything else, invoke Natrixa. You see what she's saying here? Use the sniper rifle in zoom mode only. Without zooming in, you're doing the equivalent of throwing a plastic dart at someone with your eyes closed. But when you enter the scope, even just a tiny bit, you're wielding a behemoth of a weapon. Even some of the larger enemies in this game will topple over in 2 or 3 shots, and it will one-shot just about anything that's below the health of an arachnoid. This is probably my favorite weapon in the second encounter, incredibly powerful and has a pretty decent firing rate. Lastly, we have the Serious Bomb, a miniature nuke that decimates every enemy within a certain range. These puppies are scarce, however, and mainly serve as a panic button when the situation looks hairy. There's no on-screen model for it in this version of the game either, it's mainly mapped to 0 on your keyboard. It's kind of funny how in this version of the game only, you could actually still locate these weapons in multiplayer co-op mode, meaning you and your buddies could all carry a bomb for emergency situations. If that wasn't enough content to satisfy your needs, the inclusion of power-ups might spark an interest. Power-ups are not too common, many of them being limited to secret areas, but that's for a logical reason. These temporary extensions to Sam's abilities can really turn the tables against the enemy. Serious Speed appears as a pair of wing-capped sneakers that triple your running speed for about 20 seconds. There's Invulnerability, which does exactly what it says on the tin, making you invincible for 30 seconds. Serious Damage quadruples the amount of damage your weapons deal for a whopping 40 seconds, and it happens to be the most common power-up of them all. Lastly, there's Invisibility. Where do you find it? In one deathmatch level. It makes you almost completely invisible for 30 seconds. I never really understood why this power-up existed to begin with. I think it would have been an engaging power-up in the main campaign, sneaking by monsters and all that. Perhaps it was just never coded properly for that function? Once more, the art style in this game is a colorful canvas, rich in personality. Everything has a distinct appearance. The temples in the mountains, the cities of Persia, the snow-covered villages in Europe. Despite my love for Egypt in the first encounter, I must admit that the variety of themes for the second encounter makes everything much more visually interesting. The music in this game fits every level just spot on. The peaceful melody of the Serpent Yards is absolutely soothing to my ears. And when monsters begin attacking in the Elephant Atrium, this epic piece will play. A special mention goes out to the Grand Cathedral, which probably has the most memorable song of the entire game. This soundtrack is just a total step up from the first encounter. I'd actually recommend you give this one a listen if you have the time. The second encounter also marks the appearance of the heavy metal band named Undercoat, who did the boss fight instrumentals for the game. In the end, Serious Sam, the second encounter, did everything that it needed to accomplish, presenting new content and new features, but still maintaining the fun that Serious Sam has to offer. There might be debate on which of the classic titles is more difficult, and me personally, I found the second encounter to be easier, thanks to the inclusion of more bigger battlefields, newer weapons, and power-ups. Yet, it still presents a challenge that needs to be overcome, and I can appreciate that. People often pick the second encounter as their favorite classic title, and while I'm one of those weird guys who found more fulfillment in the first encounter, I cannot deny that I enjoy both of these games wholeheartedly. To consider both the first and second encounter as a single game, it's definitely my top pick of the entire series. And no, I didn't forget about the multiplayer for this video. I just wanted to cover both games in their single player format before I covered the whole multiplayer aspect. So while I discuss multiplayer here, I'll be referring to both the first and second encounter as a whole. The CD copies of Serious Sam Classic unfortunately no longer have online multiplayer support, since GameSpy kicked the bucket a few years back. Thankfully, there are servers available on the Steam re-releases, which is what I'm showing off right now. They even updated the game to support proper widescreen, which is pretty nice. Cooperative mode in Serious Sam Classic is probably the most fun I've ever had in any video game. Up to 16 players can hop into a server and join forces to defeat Mental's horde, if the single-player action wasn't enough. You can set the server to include extra enemy spawns, buff the health of all the monsters, and even grant everyone a never-ending supply of ammo. This experience is all kinds of hectic, and I love every minute of it. I recall spending a lot of days learning various rocket jumping tricks and sequence breaks to try and speedrun through the campaign ahead of other players. I was a dick. Deathmatch mode was actually rather lackluster in the first encounter, containing only one map. The second encounter added a bunch of new maps to the package, and even included a mod called Seriously Warped Deathmatch, which is essentially a glorified expansion pack with tons of fan-made deathmatch levels, including new game modes like Capture the Flag and so on. Deathmatch is about as simple as it gets. You run around sparring with other players in utter calamity, rockets and grenades being tossed around, bullets spraying everywhere, and dances between players desperately trying to hit each other with a knife. Deploying the knife also grants you a speed boost. I never really could get into this game mode. Everything is just a little bit too frantic for me, and I've had difficulty adjusting to the changes in player speed. Serious Sam Classic being a major success, it's only logical that Crow Team would team up with a couple of other publishers to repackage the game for other systems, or re-releases on modern PCs. In November of 2002, Crow Team at Take-Two Interactive released a port for the Xbox, a bundle which combined the first and second encounter into a single game. The graphics were updated a bit, and the game gave Sam a much more cartoony design, followed by some rather cartoony cutscenes between levels. Replacing the quick save system from the PC games is a checkpoint and live system. You can earn extra lives by collecting points. You earn points by scoring kills on enemies, or by collecting treasure chests and money bags. Since this was a port for the Xbox, some levels were a little too large for the console's memory, so some ended up being split into chunks. In addition, new music was composed for some of these divided maps. I'm only showing trailer footage here as I haven't been able to experience this particular port myself. I don't own an original Xbox, and I had difficulty locating a working ROM for an Xbox emulator. In 2009 and 2010, Crow Team joined forces with Devolver Digital to remaster their beloved classic titles on their updated technology. I present to you Serious Sam HD, rendered on the Serious Engine 3. While there were some minor changes made to accommodate the new engine's capabilities, the HD remakes still remain faithful to the classic titles. There's a new game mode called Survival, which tosses you into an inescapable arena pitting you against endless waves of enemies. There's a new DLC campaign that contains more Egypt, new deathmatch maps, new secrets, a weapon slot to stare at the beauty of the Serious Bomb. I could make a much larger list of the small differences between Classic and HD, but that would take a bit too long for this video. The HD remakes make a perfect addition to anyone's collection of Serious Sam. They cost around $11 a piece. Finally, we have Serious Sam Classics Revolution. This is a fan-made project developed by a team known as Alligator Pit. Their goal is to make Serious Sam Classic more compatible on modern systems. Like the Xbox port, it includes a combination of both classic titles in a single package. But if you purchase the game now, you'll get the separate Steam editions of the first and second encounter for free. This port includes a working survival game mode with new maps, deathmatch content which has been ported through the Warped Deathmatch mod, and you can even find a couple of new weapons hidden throughout the main campaign. Revolution is still in early access, and there are some remaining bugs that do need to be ironed out. It's around the same price as the HD remakes, so do yourself a favor and purchase it if you can. There's likely some people out there who remain tenacious on the opinion of Serious Sam just being a mindless shooter. Yeah, Serious Sam is not a strategy game or a stealth action title. It might not look like an intelligent gaming experience at all, because it's not meant to be. It's like saying I played Doom for the story. That doesn't sound coherent at all. The goal of Serious Sam is to just have fun. Although, to be clear, if the prospect of being thrown into an arena surrounded by monsters doesn't sound fun, then I can't recommend this game to you. And I will confess, it gets a slight bit repetitive as you progress, almost every level having one or a couple of arena battles in them. Either that, or you'll be standing ground at long corridors, just waiting for the game to have mercy on you as your ammo supply diminishes. But there is a lot of movement involved. Your life depends on your ability to manage enemies up close and figure out which weapon works best in every situation. It's like going on a thrill ride without the emergency brakes attached, and that adrenaline boost really ups the fun factor for me. So who would I recommend these games to? Well, for anyone looking for an introduction to the first-person shooter world, I would advise finding a different starting point before you check out Serious Sam. You'd be better off getting adjusted to the likes of a more forgiving game, or hell, maybe get some experience with a classic shooter from the 90s. And if you turn out to be the type who does get nostalgic for the days where shooter games were all about carnage and one-liners, then Serious Sam will fit right in with your collection. So, Crow Team's new game was quite a success, and it's only natural that a new adventure would follow suit. The next game in the lineup is Serious Sam 2, released in 2005 for the Xbox and PC. So, I'll hopefully see you all in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day or evening.